thank you, Peter, for the opportunity. I want to give you a little bit of a backstory before I actually get into and describe what I experienced in my life of the Vietnam War. Seems like an odd maybe thing to do or whatever, but I just want to kind of go back a little bit. It was a few months ago. I was reviewing Volume 4 of Caribou Airlines, one of the books that my dad is writing, chronicling the caribou in Vietnam. And I got through Volume 4, and quite frankly, I'll just put it this way, I felt inspired, okay? I felt inspired by the bravery, the just, attention to everything, the dedication, everything that you all have done and did do at that time in Vietnam. I was blown away. I was brought to tears, quite frankly. And in a moment of weakness, I decided to ping my dad, and I went, I wonder if anybody's ever done something where they would do a reflection, come to this event, and share with you all a different way of looking at it, or just from a different vantage point, what families had experienced, through this whole process. And the answer I got back was, gee, no, nobody's ever really done that. And I said, well, I think it might be interesting. I don't know. Let me draft something. And I'll give it to you, and you guys, share it amongst, yourselves, the board or leadership team or whatever. And if you're interested, I'm up for it and I'll do it. And the answer came back, wow, this would be great. So that's the little backdrop and a little backstory. One other little aside I want to share is some of what I'm going to share with you all is from my brother's vantage point. So my younger brother, Michael, who has been to several of the reunions. I was at the one in Fort Walton Beach 2 years ago. Usually my work schedule doesn't permit and doesn't allow me to be here, but anyway, so there's some observations from his perspective as well. I was 8 years old at the time and living in Dayton, Ohio, when my father received orders to join the war in Vietnam. Being 8, I wasn't paying much attention to world news and events, but I was aware of it and had been worried that my dad would have to go at some point. I did not understand what his role would be, and was thinking he would be a soldier on the battlefield, like I had seen in some World War II movies. And I was very, very concerned that he might not return home. The day came for my dad to leave, and as a family, we went to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to drop him off. At some point leading up to that, my dad pulled me aside and gave me the, "You're the man of the house now" talk. Being the oldest of 4 children, I guess it made sense, but I don't recall too much about the brief talk as I was choking back tears. We were there at Wright-Pat, waiting around for the time he would have to leave, and we were getting more anxious as the minutes ticked by. I wanted desperately to stretch those minutes to hours, but the time finally came that he had to say goodbye and leave us. We were all very broken up, with my younger siblings not understanding the situation as much. And I recall getting very impatient with my youngest sister, 5 years younger than me, who was starting to get hysterical. In any event, we moved on. And then he walked down the corridor and through the doors, and he was gone. Mom was having a very hard time with it. And after taking some time to collect herself, we slowly headed out to the parking lot to return home. We were all numb. In her confusion and fears, Mom wasn't totally paying attention, and while back at our car, she closed the car door on my sister Cindy's hand.
Oh, did.
That elicited screams of pain and shock on Cindy's part, and we were immediately going off to the emergency room. I think I said something like, "Great, just great." Because Dad was gone for less than 30 minutes, and we were already had a major accident. How much worse could it get? How in the world were we going to survive a year of this? The good news was that nothing was broken other than our hearts. During my dad's year-long tour in Vietnam, we would regularly watch the evening news on TV to keep up with what was happening. I kept hoping to see him on TV. No kidding. Every night, I'm watching, and I'm studying, and I'm looking, and they're interviewing people, and I'm hoping that I would at least see him like walk by in the background or something, and then I would know he was okay. But that never happened. I was relieved when my dad's parents arrived to stay with us, partly because Grandpa was now the man of the house, and that burden was no longer on me. Being a technology nut, I don't know how this happened, but Dad somehow managed to set things up where he and my mom could exchange audio tapes. It was always a nice surprise when a tape arrived, and we got to sit down together and hear Dad's voice again. Dad would send letters occasionally, and it was so good to hear from him. In November 1968, he wrote a letter specifically to me, which I read many, many times. It included words of love and encouragement, and typical for my dad, he also commented on my schoolwork. I recall my first reaction to one section, which I'm going to read for you now. Your report card seems fairly good. I'm encouraged that you had no particular weak areas. Your spelling was particularly impressive. Remember, I'm 8 years old, okay? However, I am disappointed with your math grade. A C is not good enough for you. I fear that you have a tendency to do your work much too quickly without being careful to take the time to do the work accurately so all the answers are correct. Does that sound like him or what? Wow. I was blown away by that. How did he know? It was as if he was looking over my shoulder while I'm at school taking tests. At first I thought Mom must have told him, but he just knew me so well. He was right. I focused too much on beating my classmates to finish the test, but I made mistakes along the way. His comments to me at 8 years old would have a lasting impact on my life and my career. And I rarely ever got less than an A in math and science after that. And oh, by the way, I still have that letter today. I believe my brother has a similar letter, although I don't know the contents of that. So he has to dig that up, and we'll have to check that later. Christmas for our family in 1968 was particularly difficult since our father would not be home. I felt so sad for my mom, but she tried very hard to make the holiday special for all of us. Dad gave me a G.I. Joe and a watch for gifts. And they brought tears to my eyes because I missed him so much. I wanted him to be home with us. That G.I. Joe was a French resistance fighter from World War II, which in hindsight is rather interesting considering the history of French involvement in Vietnam. By the way, that is a very rare G.I. Joe. And I kick myself that along with Hot Wheels and other things I collected as a kid and kept, I actually sold all of my toy collection like 20 years ago, and that was in that. And I really want to find one again. Anyways, for the G.I. Joe collectors in the crowd. All right, in the spring of 1969, the day finally arrived and my dad would return home. My brother Michael recalls shaking all day because he was so excited he could not calm down. We stayed up late that evening, anxiously waiting, but he didn't come when we were hoping. Eventually, we were shuttled off to bed for the night, And then sometime around 2 o'clock in the morning, he finally made it back. And the whole house erupted with screams of joy. Dad picked me up and gave me a big hug. And I recall him having a beard, because he hadn't shaved for a few days. As he held me, I rubbed his whiskers in fascination because my dad had always been clean shaven, as long as I'd known him. In time, new orders from the Air Force arrived, and we moved to Los Angeles area, where he would pursue his PhD at UCLA. After his return from Vietnam, and for many years to come, there was little to no mention of his experience during the war. Michael has similar recollections as me, which I'd like to share with you. I don't really ever remember a time when Dad talked much about his service during Vietnam. I always felt like he didn't want to talk about it. I was thinking that he wanted to forget it because something really bad happened there. It was only through getting him to talk about his Bronze Star that got me starting to ask him questions about how it went there. So while we were living in Los Angeles, Dad was awarded the Bronze Star for a mission during the war that involved the recovery of a damaged C-7A Caribou. Dad did tell us a bit of what happened, but I don't recall hearing much detail at that time. From the few tidbits I heard, I created this image of what had actually happened. And that image is him flying a caribou out of a jungle after fashioning a wing from bamboo. Well, after all, he just got a major award from the Air Force for what he did, right? That would be really remarkable, flying a plane with a bamboo wing. Obviously, that's not true. It was just, as a kid, that was my imagination, right? From the news coverage we had seen, I had some idea how difficult the war had been for those who were there, and I didn't want to cause pain for my father. So for many years, I didn't bring it up. Then in 1979, I saw the movie Apocalypse Now with friends from college. None of my friends' fathers were in the military, but they knew that my dad had been there. They were very curious and started asking all sorts of questions. And I couldn't answer any of them because I didn't know anything. This all culminated in me asking my dad if the Vietnam War was like how had it been depicted in Apocalypse Now. Frankly, it was a veiled attempt to get him to open up and talk about it. After he went and saw the movie, he basically said it wasn't like that, although they got some things right. At that moment in time, that was the most he would say. Many more years went by, with many changes happening in our lives, including my dad's retirement from the Air Force, which was quite a surprise to me. Nevertheless, life went on, and the past was relegated to the past. The subject of Vietnam didn't come up again for many years. In the late 80s, my family moved from San Antonio, Texas to Orlando, Florida. So there were even fewer opportunities for me to interact with my father. In 1991, we were visiting my wife's family in South Georgia. Instead of just sitting around my in-laws' house, not a lot of fun, my son and I went to the Air Force Museum at Robins Air Force Base in Warner Robins, Georgia. Great museum if you've never seen it, by the way. I think a lot of you have, because I remember telling my dad about this, you know? It was, I think, inspirational, whatever. So it was there that I saw a C-7A Caribou in person for the first time. I was excited to see one finally, and was also very surprised at the look of it. I'm sorry, I mean, I know you guys love it and everything, but that is one weird looking plane. This huge tail on the back end, it doesn't look like it belongs on that fuselage, but I'm not a pilot. So, what do I know? I told my son that his grandfather flew that plane in Vietnam. Patrick was amazed, thinking that that specific plane was the one his grandpa had flown. I had to kind of correct that. I have no idea if he flew that particular one, was what I remarked to him. I shared the news and comments with my dad when I spoke with him again, and he told me more about the plane and its capabilities, but still, no stories or reflections were offered. More than 2 decades later, and after reconnecting with fellow Air Force veterans from this association, things took a turn. It seemed that Dad reached a point where it was finally okay to discuss the war and his experiences. My siblings and I started prodding him to write his memoirs because he has so many stories about the Naval Academy and the Air Force. To us, those experiences are pretty remarkable, and we want to see them captured so they are not forgotten. Seemingly, his passion to document the past has been focused on the mission you all were entrusted with. And he embarked on a remarkable project to document the history of the United States Air Force Caribou in Vietnam. But there was a chink in the armor finally, and Dad started opening up more about his tour in Vietnam. He asked me to be one of the reviewers of the Caribou Airlines books, and as a result, I have learned a great deal more about all of your experiences. While on a road trip together 3 years ago, Dad and I got many hours of quality time together, and I got to hear many more stories. From my vantage point, our father's involvement with the Caribou Association was a game changer. What seemed to be taboo in the past was no longer so. For the influence you have been, I am forever grateful to the members of the Caribou Association, because without you, we might still be ignorant about that time in Dad's life. In closing, it is my hope that everyone shares their stories with their family. Because trust me, they want to hear your stories. Thank you very much. I turned it off.
Did a great job. You did. Amazing.
If you want to see it later, there's a picture of my son with the Caribou and Robin's Air Force Base.
No, we didn't build the replacement part of the wing out of bamboo. That's the bird that went into boot crack, and AC didn't notice that the Huey was too close to the runway, and the rotor mast cut off 6.5 feet of the left wing. So I took the recovery team in, 5 guys, my flight engineer, and 4 other guys. Remarkable it may be, they built a new wingtip for that airplane out of raw materials. Extruded L, T-shape, raw aluminum. We got some parts. We needed a flap, an aileron, a new T-duct for the wing, very hard to put on, etc. But when it was all through, I asked one of the guys, do you have any, spray paint can in your toolbox? He says, yeah, I got a can of zinc chromate. So we had taken stuff with us, compressor, aero stand, etc. I said, get that aero stand over underneath the wing. And I got up on the aero stand, and leaning backwards, I painted on the raw aluminum underneath it, made in boot crack by the good guys. As any of you who were a camera on know that the their hooch area had a white picket fence around it, and little signs with a cowboy hat, a white cowboy hat, and underneath it, the home of the good guys. So, thank you, Godfrey. And I would say that take the lead and follow it. Your children, your grandchildren, okay, want to hear that story. There's a good reason why, if you look in front of each volume, stole a line from Ollie North. This is a story that needs to be told. So I'm trying to tell the caribou story, because if we don't do it, it won't get done. There's been enough years that somebody could have done that, but it wasn't done. So I'm helping tell that story from the formal, official point of view, etc. But it's your story, your individual experiences and everything that I prod you about all the time. Hey, tell me about that, okay? And you know that many of those things find their way into the book. But I would encourage you, with your children, your grandchildren. We don't have any great-grandchildren yet, and we're not the oldest in the group, but there's a lesson there, and we should respond to it, okay? All right.